30th of August 2022. In this Skidmark I'm going to talk a bit about Putin. This was something that I've been thinking about a lot, and if you look at the general posts on social media from most Western commentators and Western posters, they've got a lot to say. But from what I have seen, the bulk of it is based on information that cannot be substantiated. It is all rumors. There's a lot of ideas that has been pushed onto us for the past 30, 40 years about Russia. And as a Westerner, most of us grew up in an environment where we were told that Russia is the Satan and the West must be careful. And the West is always painted as angels and saviors and things like that, which, if you do a little bit of investigation, you will know it's total bullshit. Now I want to start the video with a clip of Putin at a meeting or a gathering or whatever you want to call it, and he's on his way out. And take note of the massive long line of people that want to shake his hand. And then there's an instance where one of the people trying to shake his hand is a blind woman, and he went past her, and someone must have alerted him, because he turned back and he went directly to her and he shook her hand. Now, to me, that is a typical action and reaction from Putin. Yes, a lot of people say that Putin is a dictator, and they've got all sorts of stories about how vicious and violent he is. But much of it can never be substantiated. And the Putin hate is fueled by the Western press. And the Western press is fed information and storylines by politicians. And that is something that really beginning to irritate me. This idea that democracy is the savior of everything on earth is total bullshit. We all know that. They want to give you America as the main seat of democracy. Look at the reality in America. That political system of theirs has been so corrupted by money that there is very little to choose between the two parties, because they all go for the same end goal. And as the years go by, the people, the actual voters, are getting less and less and less say in their future. They vote on the hope that things will change. The fiasco around the Trump-Biden election, I'm not going to discuss that, but it was quite clear that there were things happening that was not supposed to happen. But the end result was the chosen one was elected as the President of America. Now, the current situation in the world is this, in my opinion, and you must understand, these things are my opinion. It's all my opinions, and my opinion is based on what I see and what I read and what I find. We have got a major problem with the WEF, and what is most disturbing is that the WEF is not working from the shadows. They are right in our faces. They tell us exactly what they want to do to us. They talk about the Great Reset, they talk about population reduction, they talk about chipping everybody, they talk about social credit system, they talk about the fact that you will own nothing and you will be happy. And they managed to get control over most of the Western governments. Justin Trudeau is a Schwab puppet. He does exactly what Schwab tells him to do. Same thing in the Biden shithouse. Those people are following the WEF plan. The pestilence situation was a very good example of this. In that plan, they tested if it was possible to lock down all the citizens. And it worked for them. And they got a lot of inspiration from that. Trudeau went and he took private people's bank accounts, and nobody really made a big noise of it. Yes, there were the voices that were protesting like hell against it, but not the mainstream media was all the way with him. Look what Johnson did in England. It is now quite clear that those lockdowns and things served no purpose. But what happened is there was, I think it's about 42, they reckon $42 trillion worldwide was lost by small and medium enterprises and private citizens. And the global corporates gained $48 trillion. So it was just a displacement of wealth from the masses into the hands of the few. And this WEF has got tremendous control over governments. New Zealand, that woman there, WEF. Scott Morrison in Australia, same thing. Liz Truss, the same. Johnson, the same. Trudeau, the same. And the WEF doesn't make, they are not hiding the fact that they have their puppets in all the governments. Here in South Africa, it's a similar story. The DA, they got plenty bucks from the WEF and from Gates. And the same with ANC leadership. We are not 100% sure of exactly how deep it goes, but with the ANC, they've got a problem. And that is that the ANC has got a split loyalty. On the one hand, they've got the financial masters from the WEF, but on the other hand, they've got a traditional bond with Russia. And in the end, Russia will win. But the fact of the matter is the citizens are going to pay for it. But the people in general, the Western people in general, likes to paint Putin with a red brush. Now, what happened in the Ukraine was, it didn't start in February this year. This thing started a long time ago. And in 2014, it was driven to its first flashpoint with that Maidan revolution and the coup that the Americans orchestrated. And that's how they put Zelensky in power. But what people don't want to remember and take note of is that the Ukraine was known to be the global hub for human trafficking, for organ harvesting, for synthetic made drugs. It is a corrupt cesspond that. What I want to know is, what the hell are the West so desperate to hide there? There is more than enough evidence of how far the Bidens and the Clintons and the Kerrys are involved financially in Ukraine. The American Defense Force was involved in many of those biolabs. And the Russians took all those biolabs. And they've got all the information. And they are releasing pieces by piece. But the West ignores this. And it is my personal opinion that Putin is the only leader that was willing and had the guts to take the globalists on. And he is destroying them. If you look today at the plans of the WEF, you must understand that the implementation group is a small portion of the world's population. Not even 1 billion people. That is the globalists' playground now. Their globe is going to consist out of the West, which is a fraction, a small fraction of the world population. But the Western citizens are going to pay dearly for this. A big thing that you must not lose focus on is what the final count will be of the snake poison. The reports that are coming out now looks really bad for the people that got it. And then you must take into consideration that countries like New Zealand and Australia and Ireland, those countries have got jab percentages, same with Israel, over 90%. I don't know what is going to happen in those countries. And then you must also look at the issue of immigration into Europe. Putin stopped all of that shit. None of that happened. Those immigrants did not flood into Russia. And Putin stopped the GM plants. They're not allowed in Russia. He stopped the Monsanto chemicals. Things that, and he did not allow the mRNA vaccines in Russia. So we sit with the situation that Putin was protecting his country. And you must ask yourself, where did he get the wisdom from to do that? Now, I'm not going to dwell on that. For me, Putin is fighting a lonely fight against the New World Order and the globalists. And he is beating the shit out of them. And at this stage, you must look at the realities of what's happening on the ground. Europe is collapsing economically. European citizens are going to suffer like hell. And you must ask yourself, what is the story here? Why are the leadership in Brussels so dead set and focused on destroying the European fabric? Why? We know that one of the WEF major issues is this Green Deal shit. That stuff is falling apart all over the world. All over the world. It is clear that that is not working. But yet they keep on pursuing it. I see that Ursula von der Crazy saying yesterday they're going to spend something like 500 million euros on alternative and renewable energy sources. How many years will it take to do that? Where are they going to place that? And what happens to the people? I mean, there's now some of the European leaders that are blatantly saying, yeah, the citizens must be ready for 5 to 10 horrible winters. For fuck's sake. Why? I cannot understand how the citizens of Europe has allowed this to happen to them. And all for Ukraine. And who is blamed for everything? Putin is blamed. It's Putin's gas prices. It's Putin's inflation. I don't know where the logic's and where the sense is in that. Now, you've seen that video, and then there is this post that was made, that Putin put an end to the 90% of the plundering of the 1990s oligarchs is the subtext of this war, and other hostility towards Russia. The oligarchs still in Russia have made their peace. It's the would-be oligarchs of the West that seethe with rage at the denied opportunity. And this is something that the Westerners don't want to give attention to. It is, when Putin took over from Yeltsin, Russia was in a mess, a horrific mess. It was plundered by the Western corporates, and it was plundered by the oligarchs, and the state assets were stolen in many cases, and the people in Russia was in dire straits, financially down and out. There was suffering and hunger and unemployment and misery. That is what Putin got when he came to power. And if you go and you do your homework and you look at what Putin did for Russia, and in a way, Putin is for Russia as his country, the same as Trump was for America. Trump was driven by his love for America and Americans. Putin is driven by his love for Russia and Russians. Same thing. Different countries, same thing. But they get the same hatred from the same crowd. And that crowd is all cloaked in WEF clothes. And I have made a statement a while back where I said, wouldn't it be ironic if in the end Russia remains the custodian of good Western civilized values? And I got a lot of responses on that, and the obvious things and so forth. But the reality is, if you go and look at Russian society, yes, there's Nazis in Russia. Yes, there is gays in Russia. Do they have marches in the streets? Never. As Putin himself said in an interview, every society has got its runs. But in Russia, the gays will not have a parade in the street, and he, as Putin, would not need to do anything about it because the citizens will sort it out. The same with the Nazis there. And that is something that, obviously, the Western press will not give it mileage. But that's the fact. And Putin broke the back of many of the oligarchs. The West hates him for the fact that he drove the Western plunderers out of Russia. He nationalized a lot of the resources because it was in the hands of Western capitalists. Brutal guys that were stealing left, right and center from Russia. They were plundering Russia. Many of the oligarchs fled out of Russia because Putin was coming for them. And then people make a lot of stories about the oligarchs. Now, with these sanctions and that madness of stealing Russian people's assets by the West, what they did is they broke the monetary power of many of those oligarchs. And when those guys wanted to come back to Russia, Putin said, stay away. You're not going to come in here. We don't want you here. So, and there is videos where I've seen where he has tackled factory owners and things because of unfair labor practices and layoffs and things like that. And this is things that the average Westerner don't see. But if you look at what Daniel the mechanic posted there, that is the truth. And the West hates Putin for the fact that he cut them off from the resources of Russia. Now here is an interesting post. Former Austrian Foreign Minister Karen Kneissel said that during the talks with President Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, she felt in the company of adults, in contrast to her male colleagues from the European Union whom she called teenagers. And of course this didn't get mileage, but that's the reality. The Russians are the only adults at that table. And then there's this. Putin, it is the start of a transition from liberal, globalist, American egocentrism to truly multipolar world based on international law, genuine sovereignty of nations, their will to live their historical destiny with their values and traditions to align cooperation via democracy, justice and equality. And the WEF hates him for this. And then there was this, and this was part of that farmers' revolts that we see in the Netherlands. Farmers in the EU call on Russia to stop America. They correctly understand what is happening in the world. And they're on that crude billboard. Russia stopped Napoleon. Russia stopped Hitler. Russia, please stop America. And that is, as far as I'm concerned, spot on. Then we have this one here. This is quite interesting. I like this poster. The West still hasn't figured out that those nations who produce energy and can sell it to friendly nations very cheaply are probably nations that you shouldn't try to topple their governments and destroy their economies, financial system and currencies. Western stupidity knows no bounds. And that is so true. But as usual, the West doesn't listen when Putin talks. The West is destabilizing the world to maintain hegemony. President Putin. Vladimir Putin warned the Western elites are trying their best to preserve hegemony during his speech at the Moscow Conference on International Security. So-called collective West is deliberately destroying European security system, wants to push NATO bloc eastwards under pretext of strengthening security in Europe. Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan was a carefully planned provocation, part of a strategy to destabilize the region. And that's 100% correct. And if you differ, put it in the comments at the bottom of this video. Putin on the Odessa massacre. We cannot but shudder when we remember about the massacre in Odessa, when people were burned alive. Those criminals who did this, they are not punished. But we know their names and we will do everything to punish them and bring them to justice. And it is a powerful statement he made here, and I've mentioned in the previous Skidmarks. People must make peace with the fact that Russia is going to take Odessa. It will be political suicide for Putin not to take Odessa. Odessa is historically part of Russia, extremely important part of Russia. And the fact is that what those Nazis did to the people in 2014 there, burning them alive in those buildings, the Russians will not forget it. So, nothing is going to stop in the Ukraine before Odessa hasn't been taken. And there's this little snippet. Putin will easily win a bet with the divided West. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell admitted this week that keeping the bloc together is a daily struggle, and its struggle will become increasingly difficult. Putin's main calculation has proved correct. His will to win is stronger than the West's will to resist. They chose this. They chose this path. And this is just an interesting image of Putin sitting there with a tiger, with a leopard. People are making a lot of statements based on bullshit when it comes to. And then there's a strong one for NATO. We cannot passively observe your warmongering pushing to weaponize our borders. It appears NATO is hell-bent on starting World War III. The US-led NATO is looking for trouble. Russia will continue the special military operation in Ukraine. The West has met their match here. They've very easily wiped Saddam out, and they wiped Gaddafi out, and they fucked Syria up, and they did the same to Afghanistan and Iraq. And now, all of a sudden, they're faced by a guy that is not scared of them, and a guy that has got the ability and capabilities to protect himself. The West is the big losers here, and the losing hasn't reached its limit yet. There's still a lot more to come. August 15, Putin said on Monday, Moscow values its ties with countries in Latin America, Asia and Africa, and we are ready to offer most modern types of weapons, from small arms to armored vehicles and artillery to combat aviation and unmanned aerial vehicles to our allies. The West, they miscalculated, and they are paying now, and they're so blinded by their hatred for Putin that they are focused on the Ukraine and they don't see what's happening in the rest of the world. Then there's this one. Europe will lift part of the sanctions against Russian banks. Their services needed by the EU for purchase of food and fertilizer. Sanctions will be withdrawn from VTB, PSB, VEB and a lot of other banks. And I think that image of Putin there is very appropriate. I think he's behind his hands. He says, what the fuck is this? Then Putin on US actions towards Russia and China. It is evident that Western globalist elites are attempting to distract their own citizens from dire socio-economic problems, falling living standards, unemployment, poverty and deindustrialization. That was the first speech that I've heard where Putin went directly for the globalists and he called them out by name. And I say again, Western citizens will owe Putin a lot because he is man alone breaking the back of the WEF and the globalists. And then there's this image that you can just take a look at, pause the video and take a good look at it, and it is about the children that were kept in captivity in the Ukraine. Okay, so this was a fairly long story. I personally believe that Putin was chosen by some power to resist the globalists. And I am 100% convinced that Putin is going to succeed and that is reshaping the world that we know and knew and grew up in, and that he is going to break the terror grip that the Western elite has over the globe. Just look at what's happening in BRICS, just look at how many countries want to get in there, and look at all the things that is happening outside the dollar. The dollar are being replaced in the so-called Global South. I hear that's what they refer to. The Global South is breaking away from the systems that the West implemented and maintained for a very long time. And if you look at what is happening on the ground, you can see that more and more and more countries are gravitating towards Russia. And in Europe itself, the Europeans better wake up and watch out. Keep an eye on Serbia. The Russians has already made it clear that they will support Serbia. NATO is going to try to use Kosovo once again as a box of matches to light that fires. But this time I think they're going to come short, because they're not going to have it their way only. And I have got a funny feeling that Serbia and Hungary is in the back rooms working on their relationships. I don't want to be seen as somebody just sucking things out of my thumb, but from what I see, I think a lot of those Eastern European states is going to break away from the EU. They're going to turn their back on the EU and they're going to go towards Russia. Because you must understand, there's two simple points, facts you cannot ignore. Russia is energy independent. Russia is food independent. And Russia has got opportunities because the Russian society has not been corrupted by this woke shit, and there are many opportunities for businesses in Russia. I see now IKEA has made it official, they're going back to Russia. And then I read articles about Western companies working with Turkey to bypass the sanctions so that those Western companies can get their product back into Russia. In the end, economics is going to win. And I just want to understand what the hell drove the EU leadership to commit economical suicide in the EU. Because you can do what you like, you can dream what you like. The fact of the matter is, fossil fuels and gas will be the energy sources for a very long time. And Europe gambled on the renewables and they lost. And as Kenny Rogers said in his song The Gambler, you must know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to run. Please like, subscribe and share. Thank you.